This episode was made possible by Expressvpn. Start browsing the web securely with 3 months free by going to expressvpn.com/MMI. On this episode of Meet My Inspiration, I talk with Keith Knight. Keith is a nationally syndicated cartoonist, TV creator and writer, and a speaker on issues of race, diversity, and inclusion. He's had a nearly 30-year career as a cartoonist, as the creator of 3 popular comic strips, The Nightlife, Think, and the K Chronicles. He is also a creator, writer, and executive producer of the new series Woke, streaming now on Hulu. And now, please welcome Keith Knight. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Minyen, and this is Meet My Inspiration. My guest today is Keith Knight. Keith, thank you for joining me today on Meet My Inspiration.
It is a pleasure.
Great, thank you. So, Keith, can we begin with sharing an overview of your background and what you're working on now?
Okay, well, just so people know, I call myself a gentleman cartoonist. I've been drawing cartoons professionally for, 28 years, I think. It's been 28 years now. And people are just starting to discover me through my Hulu show, Woke, that's streaming right now on Hulu. And so I consider myself a 30-year overnight success. But I grew up in Boston, just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, Malden, Mass. And Malden is famous for a couple of things. Converse All-Stars were invented there. And there's Killer Kowalski's wrestling school. He's a wrestler that was big back in the 70s. And then Jack Albertson from Chico and the Man. And he was the uncle from the original Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory. He's from there too. So there's a few other things that I found out actually, but it's too much. But yeah, just north of Boston. And just honestly, I come from a family that had always encouraged me to draw. I loved to draw when I was a kid, and they just kept on. I just remember being praised for my dinosaurs in kindergarten, and it just went from there and just sort of grew and grew and grew. And it's what basically led me from, I did comics and a high school newspaper and the college newspaper, and then moved to San Francisco. And that's where my career started, really.
Right. Well, we're going to get into your career in a bit more detail later on. But let's go back to when you were a kid. How early did you discover a love for drawing or for art? I mean, you mentioned you were already doing it in kindergarten, dinosaurs. Do you remember like that first moment, or do you remember like that was your thing from a certain point?
I just feel like I was drawing on the walls in my apartment when I was a kid. Like I don't ever not remembering drawing all the time. And again, it was just always encouraged, and I could just continue to do it. But I was also very fascinated with the cartoons in the newspaper. And back then, the newspaper was like a big deal,
Yeah.
We'd get it every day, the Boston Globe, and they just had an amazing comics page. And, it's just cool to see like all this, busybody writing and everything. And all of a sudden there's this one page of all these drawings. And so I was obsessed with it at a very early age. And
what were some of your favorite comics kind of early on, like when you were a younger kid? Which comics appeal to you the most?
Well, definitely Peanuts. I mean, that was the big thing, Charlie Brown. But even back then, there were like, I don't know, there was like Heathcliff, which is a cat, the cat before Garfield.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, like Garfield was pretty early on, but there were like super, super old ones that I was kind of into just because it was really weird. Mutt and Jeff was in there, and also Andy Capp
Yeah.
And Andy Capp was kind of wild because
Yeah. That doesn't really
it
stand
was,
the test of time.
yeah, it was just like him just drinking, being drunk, and like it's like that's how I learned about British people. Is they drink all the time and they cheat on their wives. That's like,
That's pretty much it.
oh, sorry, I just lost my headphone. But no, but what was interesting about Andy Capp is they did their best to sort of capture his accent
Mm.
by dropping different letters in different words. And I used to always ask my dad, it's like, why do they drop this here? And why do they, you know, what? But and he was just like, oh, that's how they copy his accent. And he would read it to me the way it's supposed to sound. And and so that was really kind of neat too. It's just, I honestly think that comics are kind of like one of our first languages that we learn outside of English, which is, you know, what does how do you make a talk bubble, or as opposed to a thought bubble, you know, reading it left to right and top to bottom. What happens when, you know, someone has little sweat things coming off of them, or little, so you no one teaches you it, you just kind of sort of figure it out. And I thought that was fascinating. And to this day, I'm still learning the language of cartooning and seeing things that I've never seen done before and being like, oh man, that's a great way to solve that problem. So it's, and what was great too is we lived close to my great uncle, and he got the Boston Herald instead of the Boston Globe. So I discovered all these other comics because they had separate comics pages, and that was just really fun to do and check out. I'd look forward to going up there all the time, and just seeing the different artists in that paper too.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, let's talk about when you were a kid a bit more. I want to know, who did you look up to as a child? Was there kind of a role model in your life or somebody that you admired? Who in fact did you look up to when you were younger?
Totally, my great uncle. My great uncle was my dad's uncle, of course, but my dad's mom, who was my great uncle's sister, died when my dad was really young. So my dad was raised by my uncle's mom, which was his grandmother. So and they were about 20 years apart, but my uncle was very young at heart, like super young at heart. And he was an artist, and he had tried to get into Mass College of Art, but they wouldn't let him in because he was Black. And so at a very young age, he went to Paris, and he went to Paris with the idea of studying there. But he came back. He was supposed to go there for a while, but he came back 6 months later. He used to tell these stories like that. He went there and just had such an amazing time, and he would spin these stories about how, like, he stayed at this hotel that was like had all these beautiful women there, and it turned out that they were all prostitutes. He said he ended up he got stabbed in a bar. He was in a bar, and these two guys next to him got into a fight, and one of them pulled a knife on the other and went to lunge at the guy and stabbed him.
Oh my
And
God.
he ended up coming home with like no money, like
Stab.
super skinny, with stab wound. But the way he would like speak about it in such like longing and love, and it was amazing. And he just had a love for travel, for world travel. So he would talk about going to Japan or going to the islands, Jamaica, and Barbados. My dad's side of the family is from Barbados, but just going to Europe and going to Africa and going like just all over the place. And he was just a huge inspiration to me.
Well, you
He would
mentioned he
take
was.
a,
Sorry to interrupt for a second. You mentioned he was an artist, and I'm curious if his art inspired you also as an artist.
oh, totally, totally. But he was a painter, and it's funny because there was this beautiful painting in his house that on the wall that we all love, but I never realized for years that he had painted that.
Really?
But also, my dad was a talented illustrator, and he just never pursued it. I think just, their generation was not one of, I'm going to pursue, my passion. It's like, go get a job and get a job where you can get it. Because as a Black man growing up in Boston, it wasn't like you could just do anything.
No.
And so he worked at a factory, but when I was young, I would sit with him and we would draw these trees, but we would detail them with hundreds and hundreds of leaves. So we just sit there and draw them over and over and over again. And, that was a real bonding moment with my dad.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So you come from an artistic family, an artistic background. It's awesome.
Yeah. And I mean, artistic in the sense that people did it, but they didn't do it for jobs. I just fell out again.
Oh, you're
they didn't do it for. I wish they had the opportunity to pursue it.
Mm-hmm.
But really, I think my generation was the first generation of, I'm just going to do what I want. I mean, I have to get a job, at a factory or something. Yeah, I'm going to do what I want to do.
That makes sense why your family was so encouraging to push you towards pursuing drawing and art as a career, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, when I got to college and they saw how serious I was about it, they were like, no, there's no money in it, which was this interesting turnaround. And I was like, wait a second, you've been encouraging me all of these years, and now that I'm going for it, you're like, and they, I don't know what their excuse was. They didn't say, they just said there's no, and listen, they were right. There is no money in cartooning, so it's like, it wasn't like they were lying to me. And when I got to college, they didn't have any cartooning classes or anything like that. So they barely had an art program, but there was either fine art or graphic design. So I said, listen, there's money in graphic design. I'll do graphic design. But I always knew I was just going to be a cartoonist.
Well, let's get. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Let's get into your career as a cartoonist. It started nearly 30 years ago, I think you said before. How would you describe those early years? I think this is when you were in San Francisco. So how would you describe those early years and getting your first cartoons published?
It was interesting. Like the way I had found out about San Francisco was I was drawing caricatures in college. Actually, I mean, we should talk about college and high school because there were some really amazing people that influenced me in high school and college, which is how I ended up getting to San Francisco.
So let's go back to high school.
Yeah, a couple of things, and I do this in my talk, which is growing up, I never had a Black teacher at all. I did a comic about 2 years ago because a study came out that said that Black students, if they have one Black teacher from kindergarten to 12th grade, just one, their likelihood of going to college goes up 30%.
Wow.
Just one Black teacher. And I never had that. Now, I'm not saying that I wasn't going to go to college. I had always known I was going to college, like just from a very young age. But it just goes to show you the importance of having diversity as far as teachers go. But I was super lucky and I was lucky in two ways. One, in third grade, my twin sister and I were lifted out of our class and out of our school and sent to some special school. And it was called the Major Works program. And we heard it was for smart kids, but all we did were plays and puppet shows and creative stuff from fourth to sixth grade. We did presentations, we did all this different stuff. And when we were tested on things, they would give us headphones and a tape recorder, and we could sit in this like little yoga corner and do the test there by ourselves. It wasn't group testing or anything. So it was just like this amazing, funky way to do schooling. And I think the program ended at sixth grade. And so I went back into the school. My sister and I went back in seventh grade to our regular school. And by then we were the weirdos, because we were just like sort of into just doing art. And
you guys were the weirdos.
Yeah, exactly. But even though I didn't have, I had some really amazing teachers that encouraged my drawing. And it wasn't the art teachers. It was not the art teachers. They actually looked down on cartooning like it was some lowbrow thing, you know. It was actually my English teachers that were very encouraging. And I had an English teacher when I was a junior in high school. And he gave us Animal Farm to read. And it's really weird because I swear to you, Animal Farm was the only book I read in high school. Like out of everything that we've been assigned. And this is what I think. Like, we don't get, when I was in high school, we got more books where animals were the protagonists than people of color.
Wow.
So, like, you know, so none of the characters looked like me. And the metaphor of the animals, you know, learning, kicking out the humans and making these rules, 4 legs good and 2 legs bad, I could relate to. And I told my English teacher that we had to do book reports on it. And I said, I can't do justice to this unless I do a comic book report. And he said, oh, okay. So I created a comic book parody of Animal Farm. And it took place in our high school. And the students were the pigs, were the animals, and the teachers, you know, we kicked out all the teachers, and I was the head pig, Napoleon, but you know, it was me. And we made, you know, under 18 good, over 18 bad, and my teacher loved it. Like he loved it so much that he like held on to it and showed, because I was drawing caricatures of the teachers and just having fun with it.
He'd probably never seen anything like that.
Yeah. And he wrote to me. He gave me an A++ after he gave it back to me, because he kept it in the teacher's room so the teachers could see it. So I had a lot of angry teachers, but no, they weren't angry. That's the thing about the cartooning, is when I made fun of people, they were just happy that they were in it. They were like, oh wow, okay, cool. Even though I'm ripping on them, I'm like, you're not mad? They're like, no, that's cool. So he wrote back to me, said, you captured the essence of Animal Farm perfectly, but most importantly, you should be doing a syndicated comic strip. And so that's the first time I ever heard syndicated. And here's the second person, because he was great, that English teacher. The second person was the one Black teacher that was not my teacher, but was a big influence on me, which was, he was a substitute teacher. So he didn't teach anything. He just existed. And he would come into our class and he would just do a study class. But he was an aspiring cartoonist. So here was a guy in his 20s that looked like me, would sit at the desk, and he would let me sit next to him at the front desk, and we would doodle together. And that was the thing that said to me, this guy
Do you
can do
remember his
it.
name?
I can do it. I don't, but I know he checked in on me a little bit after I moved to San Francisco. And so I have a feeling he's like sort of has an eye on me somehow, some way. So
That's such a powerful influence, very
yeah,
specifically for you.
yeah, definitely. But here's what happened when I had my first Black teacher, which was in college. As a junior in college. I took American literature, and now I'm based on his name. I think it's Dr. Gerald. Yeah, Professor Gerald. Was it doctor? I'm not sure. But he was in my junior year. He was an American literature teacher, and when he assigned us authors, he assigned us Ralph Ellison, Richard Wright, Maya Angelou, and James Baldwin.
Wow.
And when someone brought up, like, why are you giving us all Black writers? He said, I'm giving you all American writers. And that, like, blew my mind, because we're taught so much that Mark Twain is American literature. That's what it is. And so when he turned me on to these writers, like, that's when I started reading, voraciously. And is that the word? Yeah. Anyway, I totally ate up that stuff, and my work changed.
Was that your first time reading Black authors like that? And I'm curious, how did that affect you?
Totally. I mean, it affected me in a way that, like, what we're going through now, they were going through then,
Probably.
and nothing. Yeah. And their experience is our experience, and nothing has really changed. And we're not being taught that at all. In history, you would get taught that, Lincoln freed the slaves, then there was Martin Luther King, and then a Black president, and everything's wonderful, And I think one of the biggest mistakes, but I don't think it's a mistake, that is, teachers say, this is America. Everyone has a fair and equal shot at everything, and it's almost like it's on you if there are somehow unseen forces that hold you back. There are unseen forces that have the police treat you differently. There are unseen forces that, allow someone to make 63 cents to the dollar compared to somebody else. And so, you internalize that and say, it must, I was taught that everything's equal, so it must be me. And I think once you start to learn that it is not you, I think that's when you are released and let go, and you are able to strive. And if you want to make it a fair playing field, you have to understand what the field is, what the rules are, and how those rules were established. And so that's sort of what I try to do with my racial literacy slideshows. But jumping way ahead, no, but my comics really changed after that class. And actually, I tried to reach out to him a few years ago just to thank him, and it turned out he had died the year before, which is
that's too bad.
breaks my heart.
Well,
but
his influence is still there.
Totally. And so all through college, I had worked in Faneuil Hall in Boston drawing caricatures, and I was the world's worst caricature artist, but I was good. I was a good people person, and I wrote good jokes, so I did well. But we worked. The best guy at the job drawing caricatures was amazing. Dale Stefanos, a really great illustrator. He would get all the great gigs because the company would have a booth at Faneuil Hall, but they would also do stuff at museums and events, and then the best jobs are the ones that take you across the country.
Oh.
So he went to San Francisco. He got a gig in San Francisco, and so it was his first time there. And he came back, and he was just freaked out. He's like, man, he said, you've got to go to San Francisco. And I said, what's it like? And he's like, it's like a huge Harvard Square. And Harvard Square was just a great place to hang out in, you know. It's
Full of all
smart.
different kinds of people.
Yeah, exactly. Intellectual, great food shops and bars and books and just, you know, just cool. So I was like, oh man, I'm moving to San Francisco. Like I literally just like, I'm moving, I'm going to work, I'm going to graduate, work the summer, drive to San Francisco. And that's what I did. And I never looked back.
Did you take a trip there before you actually moved there?
No. Jumped just took an auto drive-away car. I wonder if they still have those where you transfer a car from one state to the next. And showed up there, and I knew some people there, so I could crash at their place. But I drove out there with a friend, and yeah, just never looked back. I was there for 16 years, but San Francisco is where I discovered the legacy of underground cartooning, and the fact that you didn't have to just draw a comic strip as a daily, but you could draw it in a bigger way and talk about a lot of things that you cannot talk about in a daily newspaper. And so that just, my work just grew from there. I think the first comic I ever got into, a first paid comic was, I did a review of a Beastie Boys show, in this club, this sleazy club called the I-Beam. And there was a little known band back then that was it was opening for them called Cypress Hill. And I just remember I was in the bathroom and someone had shimmied up. It was on the second floor of this building. Someone had crawled up the drain pipe or something and was knocking on the window where I was going to the bathroom. And he was like, hey man, can you
let him in?
Let me. I was like, no, I'm not gonna let you in. But I put that in the comic strip, like I guess people just had never seen a newspaper comic strip that had all this bizarre stuff in it. And especially from my perspective, and it was, you know, talking about hip hop and so I think that was the start of my career. And
those early days in San Francisco, you know, you were experimenting a lot with your cartoons and your drawing style and the themes and things like that. No doubt those were some lean years. So I'm curious, like you probably had some rough times there, but also some amazing times, I'm sure, at the same time. Sometimes the lean years are the best years. During that early time, was there kind of a mentor, or was there somebody who was successful in a similar area, somebody that you were looking towards for guidance or maybe inspiration? Can you remember a person like that?
I think we were all I just remember there was an illustrator, Nina Paley, who was doing a weekly cartoon called Nina's Adventures. She's an animator now. And she was doing what I wanted to do, a weekly strip. It was self-syndicated. And she did sort of what, for women's issues, what I was trying to do for, you know, Black issues and just for culture and stuff. And so it was great to see what she was doing. And she had a nice little apartment in the Castro up on, like in the attic of this place, and gorgeous view. And I don't know, it was just, she wasn't that far along that I would be like, this is unattainable. But, that apartment was unattainable. But where she was, and also Jaime Crespo was another cartoonist he was doing autobio, and they were both doing autobio, but he was working as he would draw stories about being a janitor in a single room occupancy hotel in the Tenderloin of San Francisco. So like really downtown, rough stuff. And the stories that he did and the style that he drew it in and the way he celebrated Latino culture and stuff like that. I mean, they both were just huge influences. They were just different versions of what I was doing. And so those two really, and they know. I thank them all every day, practically. It's like, yes, thank you. But
well, I'm curious, Keith, about obviously you're a cartoonist, and it's a huge part of your life, and so you look to cartoons and other cartoonists as inspiration, or for inspiration rather. But that's not the only place that you get inspiration as an artist. I mean, we say you're a cartoonist, but you're an artist. What other artists in any kind of medium were other big inspirations to you as well?
so many. Just off the top of my head, I would say, I'll start with cartooning. Gary Trudeau, who does Doonesbury, Chuck Jones, Warner Brothers cartoons. Actually, all the directors of Warner Brothers cartoons. Pedro Bell, who illustrated the Parliament Funkadelic albums of my youth, like all those drawings and stuff were a huge influence. Maury Turner, who was one of the first Black syndicated cartoonists. He did Wee Pals. He was a huge influence and a great person. I got to interview him at Comic-Con. And who else? I don't know, people like
And I guess I'm more interested. I mean, it's fantastic to hear about them, of course, but I guess I'm interested in, like, I don't know, painters or musicians or writers.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say Prince.
Uh-huh.
Prince was huge, like just the way he sort of messed with gender and sexuality and the makeup of his band and just the art beyond the music and all the subtle, he put in backward stuff and different things, and the fact that he just did everything, like played all the instruments, until he put together the revolution. But also David Bowie, like the way David Bowie would just be like change up, every couple of years, and just reinvent himself. I always thought that was amazing, and just and the way he called out MTV for not playing Black artists, was a huge thing to me. But just all the Stevie Wonder was like Stevie Wonder's songs in the Key of Life. I used to listen to constantly as a little kid. What was interesting is, in a way, Donna Summer was like a big thing. As a little kid, I would listen to, it was probably inappropriate, but her moaning for like 10 minutes on Love to Love You Baby. My parents had that album, but she babysat one of my friends I grew up with, and then she moved to Germany. And that's where she made it big first, is in Germany. But everybody who went to Europe and got out of this country, from James Baldwin to Josephine Baker to Jimi Hendrix to Donna Summer, all these folks went to Europe because they just felt like they weren't appreciated here. And in many ways, cartoonists, and not just Black cartoonists, but cartoonists, cartooning has way more respect over in Europe and in Japan than in the States. And the States are now catching up. Uh-huh. Graphic novels are on the rise. All these places have cartooning classes and all this stuff. But back in the day, it was just like, it's just very interesting. And it's no surprise that I feel like I have some time overseas that I want to put in. And my wife is from Germany. And, when I go there and walk into a shop and see all the stuff like Tintin and Asterix, but the first time anyone adapted my stuff for television or film was a German filmmaker. And it was years ago, decades ago, when I just had zines in a couple of places in Lower Haight, a few different things. He picked up my zines there, and he wrote to me and he said, hey, I would like to make a film based on 3 of your cartoons. And, I was very like, yeah, just spell my name right in the credits. And then a year later, as Germans do, they get it done. And my stuff was playing in the Berlin and Beyond Film Festival at the Castro.
Wow.
So that was the first inkling of, oh, okay, this can work. Yeah, this does translate. Okay.
That's amazing.
And yeah. And just watching artists sort of innovate, sort of make do with what they have and create, and also how they repurpose things. And there are so many out there that, I admired when I'm a big Star Wars fan. I'm the world's foremost prequel denier, but just how Star Wars was made and all the trouble he experienced making that film, sandstorms, no budget, special effects that never even existed, and all that stuff, and he still created this classic. And I always tell people, like, when he made the prequels, he had no opposition whatsoever. There was no conflict. Like, everybody was yes around him. And he had all the money in the world. He had all the special effects in the world. And sometimes you need to have the adversity. You need to have a limited amount of resources to innovate and create. And so that's a big thing. And I got to meet George Lucas before the prequels came out. So it was appropriate fan worship. And it was a very subtle thing. But I was walking with a group of people downtown, and he came by. He came by with, I think, his daughter, at least maybe his 2 daughters. I'm not sure.
He's a Bay Area guy, I think, as well, right?
Yeah. He walked by me, and no one else noticed it was him. And I just subtly, like, started backing up in the same way I was walking, and just to catch up to him. And I said, Mr. Lucas. I said, thank you for, I can't remember what I said, but it was just like, it was very, I didn't go nuts, but I said it in a nice way.
We're inside, I'm sure, but yeah.
Yeah. And then I walked back up, and I waited till I was around the corner, and I grabbed everybody. You fools! It was great. You missed George Lucas.
It was great. That's awesome that you had that moment. Well, let's bring it back to you a bit, Keith. I want to talk more specifically about you and your cartoons and the messaging that you kind of had fairly early on, I think, in your career. You had a desire to sort of keep it light, I think, as you phrased it. In other words, to not get too serious or political in your cartoons. First of all, is that true? Because that's what I've taken from your show. So I want to make sure that that's an accurate depiction of how you were early on.
No. I mean, if you could say years and years ago, let's just say that I packed 35 years into an 8-episode season.
Yeah,
we made it like we made it that extreme for the audience,
that makes sense.
For the journey. But I was doing work like that before I had my incident with the police. So, but it would have been too muddied and, nuanced, I think.
It wasn't quite as intense as you mentioned. You had an encounter with the police, right? Things got a bit more intense after that. Well, let's get into that a little bit, and maybe even some other similar circumstances in your life. It is documented in your show, but for people who haven't seen the show, could you share that experience with us, please?
Yeah. I had been living in San Francisco for about 10 years, and I was in my neighborhood hanging up posters for my band at a bus stop I'm usually at. And while I'm hanging them up, a police car pulls up, across traffic, and guy jumps out and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I am hanging up posters for my band." And I said, "I have this stapler in my hand. I'm going to put it down on the ground." And he gets on the radio and says, "We have the suspect." I said, "What suspect? What are you talking about?" He says, "You fit the description of someone who's been robbing houses in the neighborhood." And I said, "What's the description?" And he said, 6 foot tall, black male. And that's it. That's all he said. And at that time, I had like dreads, like crazy. You know, I could have been easily described as a black sideshow Bob. Like I've often described my hair as that. And so, you know, right then I said, police coming down from Arguello, police coming down from Fulton, police coming from the beach. And I was like, wow, like this is that moment that I've been writing, you know, I've been putting in my comics. This is happening to me right now. And like, it wasn't like I was, it was a much more mellow encounter, but it was interesting to see from the inside out as opposed from the outside in of the incident. So I was like looking at cars going by to see if I could catch people's eyes and stuff. And, you know, they were just like, why is that guy staring at me? Like, why is, you know, they were genuinely frightened. But the most surprising thing is I had, my white roommate was on a bus coming down Fulton, and he looked down and he said he saw all the police cars, and he was like a SFPD hassling another black man. And as he got closer, he saw my hair and he was like, "Oh no." He's like, "You know, that's my black man." So he jumps off of the bus. And this is the thing that really shook me, was he came running across the street and got into the cops' faces in a way that, like, if he had been black or if he had been brown, they would have tased him, they would have beat him, they would have totally arrested him or worse. And like, that was the thing that shocked me, was they were like, "Oh man, take it easy, take it," you know, like they were treating him like he was the manager. And I, you know, I was just like, so that to me was the shocking thing. And that was the thing that for me sort of made me double and triple down on what I was doing. So, you know, before I would do like one thing about that and then maybe 2 or 3 other things, but then it sort of switched and I was just like,
That was a major pivot point for you.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm curious. I had the opportunity to speak with Neil deGrasse Tyson not too long ago, the astrophysicist. I mean, he's kind of a
cool.
Everybody knows who he is.
Dude.
He is a cool dude. And we talked a bit about this, and he highlighted something for me that, you know, as a white American, it never really occurred to me. He mentioned that from a very early age in his household, there was training from his parents passed down to the kids for what to do in those kinds of situations, because his parents were like, this is inevitable. It's going to happen to you again and again and again. I'm curious if you had a similar experience in your household when you were a kid.
We never got an explicit talk, but it was implied, and it was never like, this is going to happen to you. And I don't know if they just thought we just were smart enough to know better, or but you know, it's funny because I asked all the guys I grew up with, and we never got that talk, but we knew it. Like it's almost like it's almost internalized. Now I've had to talk to my kids about it. Like in Los Angeles, there was like a neighbor that had a toy gun, and I just had to explain to my then 7-year-old or 6 or 7-year-old why you can't be running around with that, even if it is a toy, even if it is pink, you know. But I've we've had so many discussions about this idea of the talk, and I've had it with a lot of different people who have talked about how if you have a baby seat in the back of your car, you know, if the cop thinks that you're a dad, then they'll treat you better. If you have an emblem of a local sports team, that's a good thing to have, or the college, you know, a college sports team, because they may be able to say, oh, I'm a blah, blah fan too. And they will see somehow getting them to appeal to your humanity. And I mean, yeah, it's, you know, it's insane that we have to do that, but we've always have had to do that. We've always had to do that.
Well, you had a major encounter with the police in San Francisco that you just described. Were there other minor encounters throughout your life leading up to that point, or was that the first time?
No, I mean, there have been plenty of sort of microaggressions and stuff like that. But I don't know, growing up, you know, it was a common. My friends were black, they were, you know, white, Irish, Italian. This is Boston, and the cops were terrible to everybody. Like, especially, we grew up in Malden, Massachusetts. I said this before, and I never realized it. It wasn't until I moved to California, and especially LA. Whenever I would mention that I was from Malden, I would hear someone with an accent. I said, "Oh, you're from Boston?" They said, "Yeah." I said, "Where are you from?" "Oh, you know, Newton, this place, that place, whatever." And I'd say, "I'm from Malden," and they'd be like, "Oh, I got beat up in Malden." It was always a lot of that. And I was like, oh, like I never knew I had so much street credibility until I moved to California, and I would tell people I'm from Malden. But yeah, there were cops, especially the state cops, they weren't good to anybody. But there was an especially interesting time when I was in college, which was during the Charles Stewart case. And Charles Stewart was this white dude in the mid 80s at some point, called the police and said a black man had robbed them, shot his pregnant wife, and shot him. And she died. And so for like a few weeks, cops were shaking down any black man they could find, and it was super hardcore. And I remember it was my last year in college. Actually, it was right around, not the mid 80s, it was right around the end of the decade. So right around 1990, I think. And I remember my Spanish culture teacher. She was an older lady who would always just talk about her late husband. But she said, in the middle of class at one time, she said, "I think the husband did it." And everybody was like, "How could you say that? Blah, blah, blah." You know, a month and a half later, Charles Stewart jumps off the bridge and miss over Chelsea or something like that. And I went back to her. This was after the class was over. And I said, "You were right. You were right." And just like, but yeah, I had more bad incidents in San Francisco. I remember just walking up to two cops, and I was just asking what was going on down, because there was something going on Market Street, like 2 blocks down. And when I asked them, one of them says, "None of your effing business." Now, I'm not using profanity because my children are here, but he was so rude that the other cop was like, why'd you say that? Like, you know, the guy was just being a jerk, just to be a jerk. I also remember just after 9/11, there was, you know, back then there were random cops that would come onto buses because everybody was worried that something else was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And he came onto this bus, and there were like kids who might have been 15 years old, right? And, you know, they were smart. They were trying to be smart, like, and funny in front of their friends. And one of them goes, "Uh-oh, you know, watch out for where that plane is going, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so this cop is like, hey man, that's not funny. And this cop, who was probably maybe in his 30s, got into this verbal thing with a 14 or 15-year-old. And it escalated. Instead of just like, it's a silly thing that a 15-year-old is saying to impress his friends.
Mm-hmm.
Ended up arresting him, his friends. Like, he stopped the bus, all these police show up, and everybody on the bus is late for whatever is going on. Like,
Yeah.
and they're arresting this kid just because he didn't want this kid to like verbally, I don't know, be smarter than him in front of all these people or something like that.
Yeah.
And I remember saying that to him. I said, was that worth it? Like, is that what your job is, to arrest this
You spoke
15-year-old
up
kid?
at the time.
I spoke to the cop, and you could tell he was just like, yeah, like he was almost ashamed of all this business he started out of nothing.
But once it starts, he's not going to back up. He'll look like a fool, right?
Exactly.
That's terrible.
So, yeah, it is terrible. And I honestly believe that there are people that get involved in policing because they want to help and they're good people, but the overwhelming culture and what they get away with attracts people that have power issues. And if as long as they don't get punished for what they do, it will continue to proliferate. And from what I've seen, bad cops are protected better than good cops.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's so if there's a good cop that like wants to report on a bad cop, they're isolated, they're ostracized, and they're kicked out of the force.
That's the key.
Bad cops.
That's the key issue right there, don't you think?
Yeah, it's totally the key issue. And I think one of the things is not only should we protect real good cops, like the cops that will point out to the bad cops and get rid of them. I think we need to, instead of just taking taxpayer money and paying off victims of police brutality, that it come out of the pensions of the cops.
Mm.
So it'll come out of not only the cop that does it, but their partners, the precinct that they're from. That way, the people at the precinct will be like, listen, I heard what you did. Stay out of my money. You're out of here. Like they would police themselves.
Yeah, I think that's the answer.
If there was money tied to it. If their money was jeopardized, they'd be like, no, we're not going to tolerate this.
I mean, if you watch that horrible video of George Floyd with the guy on his neck, there's three people just standing there basically watching. I mean, they might have said something once or twice, but for the most part, I'm not saying they're good people, but obviously they weren't, out there killing people. But they just sat there and watched it happen. And that's happened again and again and again. And
exactly.
This is the key point right here that needs to be addressed. And I think you make a good point with hit them in their wallet. Yeah,
hit them in the wallet. And again, you had Neil Degrasse Tyson on there. And he said it best, like, you don't see videos of one other cop just saying, hey, stop it, get off them, like that would go a long way. But I'm worried that if the police heard that they would stage, propaganda of them saying, see, our cops will pull off bad cops. Like, they will stage something that will say, we do that too, the moment that they see that works, I just think that, because you see them adjusting things, the moment they started getting, having to wear these cameras, they started saying stuff like they'll either turn them off and have the audio going, and they will go, stop resisting, even though they're beating somebody. And I think I saw some footage of dash cam footage. They had turned off their cameras, and they were sitting there beating and kicking a guy and saying, stop resisting. And the guy is not resisting. Like, the guy's not resisting. But the dash cam video caught what they were doing, which is making it sound like something different was happening on the tape, on the audio. But it's like, stuff. People adjust and learn to deal with all that stuff.
I hadn't heard about that. That's terrible. Well,
Yes.
Keith, let's move on. We could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, I think. Let's move on to your show called Woke. It's streaming now on Hulu. How would you describe the show?
How would I describe the show? Well, I describe the character as like, he's the Charlie Brown of activism. So it's just, he's trying to do the right thing, and it just doesn't work out that well for him. So it's sort of this, it's a guy who hits his racial puberty at a very late age. and it's awkward going through it. So it's a semi-autobiographical TV show where the protagonist is about to break it big with a very innocuous comic strip that doesn't say anything, that it's very blasé, and he has a rude awakening when police profile him, and it triggers something in him, and we say his third eye opens. And we were trying to figure out, like, what would be an interesting way for a cartoonist's third eye to be open. It's like, well, what if inanimate objects suddenly become animated and start, speaking to him, and that could be his subconscious. And so that's what we went with. And it was a great unique way to make a show about a cartoonist. Because I said early on, there's nothing more boring than some guy sitting at his drawing table and just doing this the whole time. So I was like, we gotta do something more than that to make it more interesting visually. And
it definitely worked.
Yeah.
I've seen the show. I think I've seen maybe all but one episode. And let me heap a little praise on you here for a second. It's a fantastic show. It is so well done.
Thank you.
The cast is incredible. The writing is incredible, which is obviously a credit to you. It's just such a fantastic show. And I want to talk for a moment about, let me make sure I get his name right, Lamorne Morris, who plays you on the show. That guy is incredibly talented. I was blown away by his performance.
He is, and let me just say that, like, yeah, I mean, there were some really great writers on the show. I was there too, and what happened was, it was just a perfect culmination of a lot of just amazing people coming together. I think Marshall Todd, who was the co-writer with me on the pilot, he had an incident with the police too, so we could draw from those experiences. And he's a nerd just like I am, but in a different way. And so we just had all these different cultural references that were really fun. But also Maurice Marable was amazing, because he is the one who brought the sort of realism, the magical realism to the front. But Lamorne really held it down. Lamorne, it's hard to describe, but I was not totally familiar. I had not seen New Girl that much, but I just knew everyone loved him. Everyone loved him. And when I finally saw his performances, we sort of hover around in the same zone. So he just did such a great job capturing just the demeanor of the character, the likability of the character, sort of the innocence of the character. But not only that, not only was he funny, but he was able to carry the show in a way that, like, I don't think a lot of actors could. And he showed sides that, like, just, he showed range that he was never allowed to do in any of the projects he's ever been in. So
that's what I was so impressed by. I mean, he's obviously hilarious and he's a very gifted actor, but like you said, to show that complete range, even throughout one episode, that's what impressed me so much.
Yeah.
What's it like having somebody play you on screen? Is it a bit weird?
You know, I here's the thing. You know, I've been doing this autobiographical comic strip for a long time, and that character in the strip is not really me either. So it is me, but it's not me. And so I think I've had some practice sort of being separated in some ways from the character. So you know, it was a little bit of practice. I think it was awkward more in the writer's room. It's like, well, Keith's blah, 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 like them talking in the third person, or me getting used to talking in the third person. And we changed the name. So instead of Keith, Keith, it's Keef.
Totally different.
Yeah, totally different. But like, you know, so it was weirder in the writer's room. But once we were on set, you know, the weirdest part was when my wife and kids came to visit in Vancouver, and he came over in costume, and she's like, yeah, that's him. You know, it's just like, that was really weird and funny. But yeah, and it's funny. My mom said, why is he right-handed? Because I'm left-handed and he's trying right-handed. There you go. There's a little fun fact. But yeah, I don't think, I think it was fine that he was right-handed. It's okay.
Yeah. Your mom noticed.
But yeah. That's the first thing that she noticed. But it's, you know, we've gotten used to it. What I've noticed is, I learned this in the writer's room. Whenever I have like an idea, I want to make a point, I start going like this. Like, you know, I stand up and start going like this. And he was very good at imitating that. And so once he got that down, I think it was smooth sailing from there.
That's great. Well, you guys have finished the first season. Is there any word on a second season coming up?
No, I mean, not yet. I mean, we just totally hope so. We feel like we've gotten a decent amount of good press, and it seems like a lot of people are binging it and watching it over and over again. What's great about the show is there's so many little Easter eggs in it that you don't notice the first time on. And we made a point, again, this goes back to Maurice Mo, our directing producer, or producing director, I don't know what it is, but he's so like, his visual ideas that he brought to the table. There were times he'd walk up to me and he's like, oh man, you know, I want to do, and we'd be thinking the same thing. We'd be like, and there'd be stuff where the character would sit in front of a word, like it's a certain word, and then the character would sit in front of it, and then the word would change because he had blocked out certain stuff from the word. Just subtle things like that. And if you look at some of the advertisements and stuff in the background, it's all very subtle and cool. So
I'm gonna have to go back and watch again. This is your trick.
Yeah.
This is how you get people to watch again and again.
Totally. I'm going to do a series of strips that sort of point to these different things. Like the only episode, have you watched, watched up to episode 7, and there's one left?
I think I'm like halfway through 7, yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, you're only halfway through 7. So
I was watching it late. Go ahead.
The Easter egg in that is I am the koala. Let's just say that. Yes, that's the Easter egg. I am the koala.
Going on Twitter immediately, and I'm spreading the word.
I've already done a strip about it, but
okay.
How are you getting it? Do you have Hulu in China, or are you just through? Really?
Well, there's a thing called a VPN, so you can pretty much
Oh, okay.
change
Oh,
your
yeah.
location to wherever. So you can get a subscription to Netflix or Hulu or whatever. So it's a piece of cake.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on. I mean, I could talk about your show for a long time, but I want to know a little bit more about you and who are some current upcoming cartoonists that you like? Who are you into that's kind of developing at the moment? Any names come to mind?
I don't think they're necessarily developing. I think they're already there. But this guy Ron Wimberly,
Mhm.
um, he is an amazing cartoonist, and he just had his Prince of Cats graphic novel optioned by Spike Lee, and I
Wow.
think that's going to be made into a film. Well, I will say this, like, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, but Bianca Eunice, I think it's Bianca Eunice.
Uh-huh.
She did, uh, she's a black female cartoonist that was part of this thing called Six Chicks. And I think she's still a part of it, but she just did, Six Chicks is a daily strip. And there's a female cartoonist that does each like one a week. So six of them, six different women do it. She did this great one where it had a black girl in a mask, for Corona, but she also had an "I Can't Breathe" T-shirt,
Hmm.
and she drew this white woman, like like a Karen type woman, looking at her, going, um, saying, "If you can't breathe, then just take the mask off." And it was just a perfect culmination of the issues of the summer,
Mm.
and and she had to, the syndicate had to apologize or something because so many people complained about the comic strip, and it was a brilliant comic strip, and it's just so she deserves praise for doing that strip, but also just it's just I was in the daily newspaper business for 11 years, and they run some strips that are, 50, 75 years old.
Yeah.
And if you wonder why nobody read nobody under 50 reads reads the newspaper these days in the United States, it's because of stuff like that. So
It's just stale. There's no new energy there. There's nothing interesting happening there.
exactly, exactly.
All
So
right. Well, Keith, we talked earlier about some of the inspirations from when you were a kid, even in high school and university, and when you were starting your career. But I'm curious, who in your life today? Is there somebody in your life today, maybe somebody that you know, or maybe a public figure that you haven't met before? Who is inspiring you today?
there are a number of people to this day that influenced me, but also I just want to say that Tom Gamble is a big influence. Now, Tom Gamble is like he's like the Forrest Gump of television comedy. He is this amazing writer that worked on the original Saturday Night Live. He worked on Seinfeld. He worked on The Simpsons. And there's a bunch of other things that I'm totally spacing on right now.
Mhm.
But he was in the original Harvard Lampoon, like back in the day. And what's crazy about it is I didn't meet him till I was in Los Angeles. And when I saw him, he's like, "Keith Knight, big fan." And I was like, "Who is this guy?" Like, and people are like, "Oh, that's Tom Gamble. He's a great television writer, and he's a cartoonist." Um, and when he talks to you, you think his voice is so unique. You think he's joking with you, but you realize he's very sincere. And he invited me to a table reading for The Simpsons. So I got to go there and have the voices of The Simpsons reading the script. And it was, an amazing Hollywood moment. Like, oh, I'm really in Los Angeles. But what's great about it is um, I told you about my great uncle Owen. His sister, my aunt Thelma, worked at Harvard for years, and she retired. I think she retired in the 70s. She used to have a Harvard Lampoon in her living room that had a cover, and the cover on the Harvard Lampoon was a drawing of a class, this cartoony drawing, and there's a dog walking in. And someone says, you know, there's a dog in class, and everyone's just laughing, and the professor's like, oh, class dismissed. And I loved that cover, and I told him about it, and he said, I drew that cover when I was in college. And just another one of those moments where you're just like, and he was the one who told me early on. He said, Keith, he says, your work would make such a great TV show. And yeah, he said that, and he said, but let me give you some advice. Don't try to get it made. Pitch it as a live action show. Don't pitch it as an animated show. People automatically think, you know, because you're a cartoonist, it has to be an animated show. He said, if you pitch it as animation, there's only going to be 5 or 6 networks that embrace animation. You know, this is 7 or 8 years back, 7 years back. And he said, but if you pitch it as a live action, he said, there's going to be 30 or 40 outlets that you could try to sell it to. And so it was that, plus the idea that German filmmaker did decades ago, that he did a live action version, made me think, okay, like live action is the way to go. And I'm so glad that we did it.
Were you previously considering an animated series?
Yeah, I think everybody, yeah, because your stuff is cartoon. So everyone automatically thinks animation, that's the way you should pitch it, animation. But
it works well as a live action series though.
Oh, the actors, not just Lamorne, but, T. Murph, who plays Clovis, and Blake Anderson from Workaholics, Sashir and Rose, they all were amazing.
The voice actors as well. You have a pretty incredible lineup.
Every voice actor, people just say, like, you don't even talk up the voice actors enough, because every time you heard a new voice, you'd be like, wait a second, is that Keith David? Yeah, is that like, they were all amazing. And we had to do it all in COVID time. So I never got to meet anybody. Everything was done over Zoom. JB Smoove, I would have loved to have met all these folks, but hopefully we'll be able to meet somehow, some way in a season 2, if we're lucky.
I hope so. Well, there's one final thing that I want to ask you about, and it's pretty important. I saved the best for last, I think. I want to hear about your time as a Michael Jackson impersonator.
Well, it was one of those things where it was sort of the circumstances at the time. And I guess it's the same thing. If you were a 6 foot tall black male, you could be a Michael Jackson impersonator. Just put on some glasses. And what happened was, in our high school, we have a variety show every year. And at the end of the variety show, we have, the finale. And Thriller was everything that year. And so they were going to do a recreation of Thriller, zombies, dancing, Michael Jackson. And they needed Michael Jackson. And I thought, I wasn't even thinking about it. And someone at lunch said, Keith, you'd make a good Michael Jackson impersonator. And this other guy that was there was like, I don't think he'd make a good Michael Jackson impersonator. He's too skinny, which was such a bizarre thing to say. I was skinny though. But I was like, oh, all right, if you're going to say that, then I'm going to go for it, so I went home and quietly just studied and worked super hard to get it all down. And then when I went to the tryouts,
were you singing as well, or just was it the moves?
No. Everybody back in the day, everybody lip synced. It was everything was lip synced. So I went to the tryout, and get into the details. I didn't get picked for that. They had already had, and it was that guy that was ripping on me. He had already had it. They didn't even let me try out. And so what was really weird is we were in the same dance group together. And here's the thing, it's like the black dance group always wins the show. Doesn't matter, every year. Like we were the breakdancing group. And but there were other breakdancing groups too, but we were gonna win anyway. But so here's what happened. Very passive aggressive is when our performance was happening before the finale. And instead of wearing my breakdancing outfit, I came in my Billie Jean outfit and just danced. I didn't do any breaking. I did Michael Jackson stuff before the Michael Jackson finale. And so then we did great. We did great. Like there was no way we weren't gonna win. And then there was a finale, and that happened. And then we won the show, so we got to raise the trophy. And then after, behind the scenes, all these people started asking me to do their parties and to do the local fair and this and that. So I suddenly found myself like,
you're getting paid to do this?
Yeah, $75 an hour.
My God.
Being a Michael Jackson impersonator, which was like $75 an hour in high school. Man, that works. I got paid more then than I got paid now as a cartoonist. And but for about a year and a half, I was Boston's premier Michael Jackson impersonator, and I'm working on a long gestating graphic novel that about my time as a Michael Jackson impersonator. I am currently working on the chapter of I had a Madonna wannabe girlfriend, and so it's all very embarrassing. But
it's better though. It makes it a better story.
Yeah, it does make it a better story. But
awesome. So you got
yeah,
a novel, and you're gonna tell this story.
Yeah, I'm gonna. My management has been on, and thankfully I have these very patient Kickstarter folks, because I kickstarted it, and they've sort of watched the show sort of come. Like, I started working on the graphic novel, and then the show started to happen, and I was like, hey guys, like, I know this is taking a long time, but I have this, this show that, like, not even the show, I shouldn't even say a show, but like, we're pitching this thing, and, like, people say it's not going to go past this part. Then we're like, oh, hey, we got a chance to write this pilot, and blah, blah. Oh, they're filming the, like, every step has been like, we made it over the next level. And now we're like, oh, we have a series. So they've been very patient and good. And not only will they get the graphic novel, but they will be getting plenty of woke swag too.
That's awesome. Well, Keith, I wish you the best with that. Keith, I've really enjoyed this talk with you today. You're an entertaining guy, and you have a unique way of sharing such an important message with people. I hope your show, Woke, blows up, and you'll have more and more people's attention on your work and your message. You're such an inspiring person to me, but also so many others, I'm sure. And I really appreciate you taking the time today to talk with me on Meet My Inspiration.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And just, yeah, everybody is inspired by it. And I think a lot of times, I don't think people realize just from day to day who's inspiring who. And I just want to say just one thing about the inspiring thing is I got a Facebook message from somebody about 2 years ago or something now, but they had reached out and they said that I was in the same dorm as they were back in college, and that they had said some sort of joke, and I had called them out on the joke because it was a racist joke. And she said, well, you weren't angry, but you just sort of explained it, why it was effed up, why I said that. And she said that stuck with her, and she started calling out her family and friends on that stuff. And she just wanted to say that, like, she's got a kid now who plays with all these kids of different races, and something that she never did. And she just wanted to say that, like, me calling her out on that thing sort of changed her trajectory in some way, shape, or form. And I don't remember her. I don't remember the incident, but I just thought that was really inspiring to me to know that in our day to day, you don't know when you're going to inspire somebody. And so it just meant a lot that someone would reach out and do that. So if there's someone who inspired you, it's never bad to reach out and say, hey, your influence made me a better person. So it's really
Great
cool.
suggestion, and that's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. Keith, thanks again.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much to Keith for his time and for sharing his great story with us. If you're a fan of Keith and his work, I'd suggest first go to Patreon and show him your support at Keef Knight, KEEFKNIGHT. Also, check out his website, kchronicles.com, to see some of his latest work and to keep up on his many ongoing projects. Go find him on Twitter at Keef Knight, KEEFKNIGHT. And of course, the first season of Woke is streaming now on Hulu. I highly recommend it. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Meet My Inspiration, and I hope we've been able to inspire you too, even if just a little. Sometimes that's all it takes to make great things happen. Using the internet without ExpressVPN is like broadcasting to the world everything you do online. Here's how to protect yourself and get 3 months for free. Did you know that your internet service provider knows every single website you visit? And what's worse is they can sell this information to ad companies and tech giants who will use your data to target you. ExpressVPN creates a secure, encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet so that your online activity can't be seen by anyone. ExpressVPN works on all devices, phones, laptops, even routers, so that everyone who shares your Wi-Fi is protected too. And the best part is using ExpressVPN is super easy. Just fire up the app, click one button, and you're protected. ExpressVPN is the world's #1 rated VPN by TechRadar, Wired, The Verge, and countless others. So if you believe your online activity is your business, secure yourself by visiting expressvpn.com/MMI, and you can get an extra 3 months for free. That's expressvpn.com/MMI.